Right, so when we thought of doing a webinar would be a great way to share information, we never would have thought that we would have over 240 registered attendees. The overwhelming response for this demonstrates the need or demonstrates the interest in this topic, but it also highlights the overwhelming demand for information in what is a rapidly changing situation. The coronavirus is impacting all businesses in some way or another, and some more than others. We understand that for some of you, you will be facing this very deeply indeed. It's important to recognise these impacts and the things that you can do to manage your energy contracts under these circumstances. So I'm going to step you through what's happening in the energy market and the actions that you can take to manage your contract and reduce your costs. My aim is that by the end of this, you'll be better informed about what you can do and what you need to consider and where you can find assistance should you need it. Now, we've already received several questions from registered participants, and a bunch of them will be answered in the presentation. There is a feature within the webinar for you to submit questions, and by the end we'll answer as many as we can, and if we don't get to yours, the webinar actually records them so we can respond individually. We've also got Scott Easton, who's our head of trading and pricing, standing by, and he'll be able to help with any questions as well. All right. All right. So the impacts of the coronavirus, they are very wide-ranging indeed. There's community impacts. We've all had to deal with social distancing and event cancellations and the way we go about our shopping and all those sorts of things. We've got personal impacts. We need to recognise those, the family adjustments that we're all needing to make, and the adjustments such as working from home and doing webinars from your spare bedroom. There's economic impacts, and we can certainly see these impacts through the stock market and what that's doing, and through the unprecedented stimulus and support packages that the government is putting out. Now, our focus today is primarily going to be on business and the impacts to business, but I also wanted to cover off a bit of what's going on in the energy market at the moment as well. So in the media, we're seeing a whole bunch of stories at the moment. They're around business impacts and closures. But we're also starting to see stories about emissions plummeting, and that is really a consequence of reducing demand. But there's also stories coming up about what issues the energy sector is facing and the challenges arising from it, and also questions around demand and what's happening with that. So I thought I might actually cover that off now. So we've had a look at demand from AEMO, market demand, and we compared the average demand for March 19 against the average demand for March 20, and found that there were some significant differences. So New South Wales is down 6.6% year on year, but that is actually the lowest March in NEM history for New South Wales. In Victoria, it's the lowest March since 1999, bearing in mind that the NEM actually started in December 98, and that's a reduction there of 6.8%. Queensland 6.3%, which is the lowest since March 2014, and South Australia, it's saying here it's the lowest on record, at least according to Morgan Stanley. So some very significant changes in demand. Bear in mind as well that these are average demands for the month of April. If you look at this on a week-by-week basis, I think the differences would be even more stark. But we also should note that demand patterns are changing as well through changes in the way businesses are operating. So we're seeing weekly system demand profiles are changing to look more like a weekend system demand profile where businesses are not operating as much during the week, and that is forcing demand through to residential. That's a theory. That we're also seeing that the weekend system demand profile is sort of moving towards a more reduced weekend system demand profile, reflecting the fact that a lot of the businesses that would normally be operating over the weekend currently aren't. Now, this means that there's fairly significant business impacts, as we would all know. So we actually had to look at our customer data based on customer type for impacted industries. And this is only for a 10-day period between the 16th of March and the 26th of March. And for pubs, taverns and bars, we saw a significant decline in energy consumption. New South Wales, 56%. WA, in all of these cases, those numbers are high. It's off a smaller sample, but we've actually got to remember that these are real impacts, and some of these people have, or some of these businesses have effectively shut their doors. So pubs, clubs and taverns, we're looking at sort of an average there of, excluding Queensland, of around about 50 to 60%. In clubs, it's even worse. That's around 60% and higher. And then accommodation, so hotels and such, that's sort of around about the 30% level on average, excluding WA. So the impacts are very, very real. So what's happening about it, and what are we hearing from government and regulators? Well, last Friday, the AER came out and said that energy businesses must go above and beyond to support customers doing it tough. And they came out with 10 new expectations on energy businesses, already recognising that energy is an essential service, but it becomes even more essential in the times that we are living. And they did come out with these 10 new expectations, and they're basically around things like offering payment plans, not disconnecting residential or small business customers, deferring referrals of customers to debt collection, providing information when it's available, providing information on the options that are available to customers, and particularly here one about networks, about minimising the frequency and duration of planned network outages. So a lot of new actions there, or expectations there. I must admit though, a lot of those, or actually they're all aimed at residential and small business customers, but I think the intent is fairly clear that it may also extend to large market customers as well. So that's what the regulator's saying. What are retailers and networks saying? Well, what we've heard from retailers, one of them came out and said to us that we have difficulty in matching what we would like to do with our ability to do it, given 98% of our revenue covers network and generation costs. And in a similar vein, in these tough times, we're looking for all measures of options to help our customers. As we are well aware, 70% of our customers' invoices are for third-party providers. What those two comments there are highlighting is that from a retailer's perspective, on their bill, they collect revenue on behalf of networks and put that and then pay it through to them. They collect revenue on behalf of meter providers and pay them. And then they've got their wholesale hedges that they've taken out to cover the customer load, and there's financial impacts on those as well. So that's just recognising the way that the retailers work. I think another retailer here has also acknowledged that businesses will be concerned about what's ahead, and some of them will have difficulty in paying. And if customers, this retailer will be offering heightened payment flexibility during this time. So I guess at the moment, the retailer responses so far are pretty much placeholders. They're acknowledging the issues, but they're so far fairly short on detail, and I guess they're still trying to figure out what their responses are. From a network perspective, as I already mentioned, the planned outages are going to be scheduled to minimise disruption, but there was also recognition from the networks that they're conscious of requests from both customers and retailers about providing relief on some of the network charges, and I'll talk briefly about those in a little while. Also, I'll note that in the news today, the Networks Association, which I'm not quite sure why, excluding Queensland networks, that announced rebates for deferred payments and disconnection fees being waived for households and small businesses until the 30th of June, and that to qualify, SMEs must experience a 75% reduction in energy. Now, that's pretty short on detail, and to be honest, was already that sort of stuff was already covered off in the AER response. So I'm not quite sure what the networks are trying to get at there. Maybe when there's more detail, we'll know more. It's probably just worthwhile here, just going back to basics a little bit, and just talk about your energy costs and what's fixed and what's variable, and what we can control. So, energy charges and renewable energy charges are contestable, but they're also a variable cost. So they are dependent on how much energy is consumed by a business. Network charges are a little bit different. For the consumption-based network charges, so those top three charges, the network shoulder, peak and off-peak, they are consumption-based, so they will be charged based on how much energy is consumed. The others are fixed though, so capacity or demand charges or network access charges are fixed, and it's worthwhile noting that they're actually determined based on a 12-month rolling maximum demand in a large number of cases. So even if a business was to wind down or to even mothball a site for a period of time, say 2 or 3 months, it doesn't actually, you won't actually get any relief under the current way of it being calculated, because it won't impact it won't reduce the maximum demand over the last 12 months. So that's something that, as I mentioned before, the networks are looking at, and also the retailers are looking at it on behalf of customers as well, to see what relief can be provided there. Now, it's also worth mentioning here as well that for many of our customer, energy actions fees and charges are actually contained within the bill, but they do, I will point out, represent a very small portion of it. Now, one of the common questions that has come up is whether or not, so a customer actually asks, can I cancel my contract? And that may be something that we hear a bit more of. And when we're talking about a large market customer, well, you can cancel your contract, but there's probably going to be ramifications around that termination. So there may be termination fees, and that's probably, well, not probably, that will be largely a consequence of what the price, where the wholesale price in the market was at the time it was when you entered into it. Because on the other side, a retailer will have a hedge of some description, and if you cancel that contract, that will ensure that they will suffer a cost, and they will pass that cost on to customers. Also, it's worthwhile noting that if you don't have an energy contract, you will go on to default rates. If you go on to default rates, they can be quite punitive depending on the retailer, but it won't actually help your network charges, because you will remain on a standard network charge anyway. So sort of limited as to what we can do there. There's a lot more questions that need to be answered around network charges, and that is something that we're going to continue to find answers on for you. So now down to the real nitty gritty. What can you actually do? Well, first of all, the first thing you ought to do is actually check your contract. Check the terms and conditions looking for take or pay. So gas contracts will have a take or pay clause. It may be something like 80% take or pay, which means even if you need to at least pay for 80% even if you don't use it. In electricity, you might see a minimum take amount or a load variation obligation. In some electricity contracts I've seen, there's a minimum take of, say, 75%. So if your business is being impacted on that, you need to at least understand it. Then you need to talk to us. And we can help guide you with some of the options that will be available to you, but help guide you through the process that you'll need to follow. And we can help you case manage that as well. The other thing you will need to do at some point is to contact your retailer. You're going to need to say that if you are suffering some sort of difficulties, you're going to need to let them know. There will be payment options available to you, and as I said, the retailers are advised that they're going to be flexible on those. The other thing you're probably not thinking about at the moment, but maybe you ought to, is think about your your purchasing options. And I'll talk about those in a little bit more depth in a moment. And also you can reduce your costs through implementing some energy efficiency measures. And I'll talk about those as well, because there's some quite simple things you can do there. So just thinking about where prices are in the market, and these are where wholesale electricity price contracts have moved since around about January 18. Now, you'll note here that there's a downward slope in all the forward years at the moment, and these slopes actually or downward falls started in around about November and December last year, after the forecast potential summer of Armageddon didn't eventuate. Remember, there was a couple of plant outages and we weren't sure whether or not they were going to return on time, and the consequence of that would have been, if there was high demand, prices would have skyrocketed and wholesale prices would have as well. That didn't eventuate. The units actually came back. There wasn't the demand that we're expecting. In fact, there was a boatload of bushfires, and that caused a reduction in demand, particularly when things like interconnectors came off in the market, and the states were separated from each other at certain times. But that's ultimately resulted in lower wholesale prices. Those have, though, fallen further in the last couple of weeks. I will note, though, what you don't see here is the impact on the remainder of the current calendar year 20 prices. They are down significantly. Many customers have already hedged or have hedges or contracts for this year, so the retailers don't have a lot more to sell there anyway. All right, then this is translated into reduced retail market prices. So specifically looking at the NEM here, I'll talk about WA in a moment. This is our Energy Action Price Index, and this demonstrates the results that we are seeing off our auction platform. And we can demonstrate here since early in the year that the prices have been falling. Now, thinking about your purchasing options, then, if you are looking for cost savings at the moment, a potential opportunity is to look at a blend and extend contract. Now, that won't suit everybody, but where it may be helpful is a customer with, say, a year or less or so remaining on their current contract, and it is at a higher price than what the future years are. So you can blend your current contract with an extension and thereby reduce your average rate. And if that's the case for you, you can actually achieve a saving on your energy bill today. And that could be quite beneficial for some businesses at the moment. So I know it's counterintuitive. A lot of people are sort of not thinking about what they're doing with their energy contracts at the moment, but here's an opportunity to save some money. Also, given these falls, consider buying your future contracts now. Now, this is also not only for fixed term contracts, but also for customers who are on progressive purchasing. You might want to consider looking at your forward periods, but Scott and our trading and pricing team will have very direct advice about those future years for those quarters. So, but this is something, given the prices that we're seeing, it may be worthwhile considering now. Now, if you are going to enter into contracts now, and as I already mentioned, everybody does still need a contract if you're a large customer. You can, what we need to be careful of here is the load or the forecast load that you need to, that goes on that contract. Now, some retailers are more flexible than others. Some don't have any load, any load conditions on minimum take, but some of them do, as I mentioned. So we need to consider, if you're going to go out now, it might be worthwhile considering which retailer you actually go with. But we'll obviously help you through that. Right, now, having a look specifically at Western Australia, we can see that since the beginning of the year, prices have fallen there as well. That's down around about $0.01 a kilowatt hour. Not as much volatility in the Western Australian market as in the NEM though, but still that's a pretty significant saving on where it has been. So consider also looking at forward purchasing there. Now, another thing that some people may not necessarily be thinking about at the moment is you can further reduce costs through energy efficiency, and that's because we've all changed the way that we're working and the way that businesses are operating. So just think about turning off equipment that you don't need. If your office is no longer in use, for example, manage your stop times. Maybe not working on weekends. Maybe there's a whole bunch of things that we can consider there. Turning off equipment in areas not currently in use. So some businesses are still operating, but they're not operating at full capacity. Reduce your demand or your load by turning off equipment in those areas. Also change your settings or controls to account for your changing conditions. So a lot of those overlap, but probably quite helpful. And you can actually, when we talked about your invoice before, if you reduce your consumption, you will save money. Now, if you are actually considering temporarily mothballing a site, there are some further cuts that you can make. You'll need to make sure that you keep your electricity on for air conditioning for server rooms. They are very hungry, they need to be kept cool. But if you're in a tenancy, you can advise your facility manager that you close so they can turn off the aircon or the lights, or check with your facilities manager for plant rooms and cool rooms. There's the ability there of putting these both into hibernation. Now, the other important thing we need to do now as well, when you do take these actions, it's important to actually monitor them through your metrics reporting, which is the service that we obviously offer. And that way you're going to actually see the cuts that you've been able to achieve, and you will note that they are quite real. But you need to monitor those. Right, so how can we help you during this phase? Well, we're going to engage with retailers. We're going to get answers to the questions that you are asking. We're currently seeking answers on things like, what will they do for businesses that are affected by Corona? What are they doing about loads that fall outside the load variation or take or pay clauses? Are they going to let it go? What are they doing? What can they do for businesses who are unable to operate, such as clubs and pubs and such? And what are they doing about contacting networks and removing daily fixed charges or reducing demand charges? What are they doing there? The other thing that we'll do is that we're going to work with you to address your specific needs. Now, yes, everybody is going to be impacted differently by this, and we need to consider individual needs, but that's what we're here for. We're here to support you, and we'll help case manage these issues for you. And we're also going to keep you up to date. We're going to do this through, you can contact your account manager for a start, but if you haven't seen them, we do these great weekly market wrap videos, and that'll keep you up to date with what's happening during the week. We've also put out a monthly energy market update, which we call the EMU, and we'll probably do more of these webinars as well. So they are what we'll do to help you. So that's what I've got here. There were a couple of questions that I just wanted to cover off from participants at registration. I know we talked a lot about bill relief and savings. That was very much a common theme in those questions. Somebody asked whether or not we do energy price forecasting. Yes, we do. Absolutely, we do. And we actually offer this, through our metrics product, we do budget estimates. And that's going to help you with your budgeting for your energy moving forward. One of the other questions was, will the downward trend in wholesale energy costs continue once COVID crisis has passed? And I think I might actually pass that one over to Scott, if you want to.
Yes, certainly, Andy. Yep. Hi, everyone. It's Scott Easton here. Forward prices, we are seeing contradictory movements. So the overall direction is downward. At this stage, we're not sure how much further prices can drop. And the reason for that is that we're seeing prices, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, approaching the cost of generation. So what we're seeing is this overall decline in economic activity pushing prices, producing a downward trend on prices. And we're seeing that continue in Victoria and South Australia. Depending on the impact of COVID and the decline in GDP, what we're seeing is, and forecasting is, just a prolonged period of current price levels. We did produce a number of outlook factors, as Andy mentioned, in our weekly market wrap, and it may well be worth our listeners obtaining a copy of that. There are a number of outlook factors that relate to the investment in renewable generation. So there has been a significant increase in renewable generation, but we believe that obviously the COVID crisis is outweighing the overall price movements at the moment. So as Andy mentioned, the decline in demand, because our market is supply and demand driven, we would expect that prices would continue down. But on the other hand, we're also seeing, unfortunately, credit risk enter the market. And in fact, some small retailers are very selectively contracting because of this risk, so the risk of default by its counterparties. And so that is having an upward pressure on prices. We are encouraging our customers, also just as an aside, customers that are exposed to power purchase agreements, to contact us. There's an area where significant premiums have been paid in the past, and we can assist in terms of looking at how to manage those costs. But the overall direction is, our outlook is downward price pressure and a prolonged period at these current levels. But what we're saying is that that the impact from credit risk and some other factors, the fact that prices are at below the cost of generation, that we know that prices have to rise into the future, and that's to provide adequate returns to asset owners. And so our view is that you would take advantage of this time, and I know that it's probably a gutsy move for some of our clients with the current outlook, but what we're saying is we're seeing great prices, and if you have the capacity, we will get through this COVID crisis, and when we're on the other side of it, we will start to see those prices increase. And what we're saying is that now, if you have the capacity, is a great time to lock in for 2, potentially 3-year contracts, because once we're on the other side of this COVID, we are forecasting that we won't see these price levels into the future, certainly not looking outwards beyond 2 and 3 years.
Thanks, Scott. That's really good. I'm just looking at a couple of questions here, and I just want to cover them off because we have hit 11 o'clock. Somebody asked about whether or not take or pay with the current situation not be deemed force majeure and therefore not enforceable. That's why I'm encouraging people, why we're encouraging people to talk to their retailer. That is certainly a change in their circumstances. Now, whether or not that's force majeure, I'm not a lawyer, and so therefore I don't want to give that sort of advice, but that's why having a chat with us and your retailer is really important, and to actually do it as quickly as possible as well. And I think there was another question here as well, probably for you, Scott. How is the current market likely to be impacting on retailers' hedge positions, i.e. are they profiting from the decrease?
It's interesting, Andy, because in speaking with a number of the retailers, it does vary. Some of them, in fact, forward hedged, as we saw prices drop significantly over the past 3 months, primarily and initially due to the amount of renewable generation. A lot of retailers did, in fact, take a forward position, expecting the market to increase again, so to turn and start increasing. and I am aware of a number of retailers who are in fact not in a overly favourable position because they have taken forward hedges higher than where the current market is. And on the other hand, of course, I've been speaking with retailers who are just hedging at the point of contract sign, so they're unaffected. But it does vary across the industry, and that will impact their ability to assist customers because of the impact that it has on their what we refer to as the forward trading book, their profit position.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Right, that's great. And then just the final question that we'll deal with here. Do you think retailers would be open to reducing the minimum usage amounts for a period of time within the term of an agreement, especially if signing up to new agreements or 2-year terms? Look, absolutely. And as I mentioned before, some of them don't actually have minimum usage requirements at all. So they would probably be the ones under these circumstances that you may want to consider once you do negotiate a contract signing up with. So I think that answers that. All right, so hopefully this was useful. I'm sure that there is going to be a lot more to talk about. There is more information coming out on a daily basis. I know we're all getting sick of coronavirus news, but I think it's going to be with us for a while. So we're going to do our job. We're going to stay on it and keep up to date with what's happening in the market and engaging with retailers to get answers to a lot of these questions as well, so that we can help you. All right, everybody, any questions that we didn't get to, we will try and get to on an individual basis, if that's okay. So thank you very much. Thank you. Overwhelming response, overwhelming attendance. I think we had about 200 or so log in, or just under, which was fantastic. So thank you, everybody, and we'll be speaking again soon.